presentation that discusses how redistricting works, what the communities of interest are, how we're trying to get input from the public in this process. I want to first, before we get started, recognize that County Supervisor Monica Brown is here. Supervisor, did you want to say anything, or?
Well,
we're online too, so the microphones are necessary for everybody.
No problem. Thank you all for coming and getting up early on a Saturday morning when I know there's other things one could be doing. So enjoy the process, and thank you for being part of, this is as grassroots as you get. Where are the lines going to be drawn and keeping everybody together. So I'm going to give this back to Michelle.
Thank you, Supervisor. Thank you, Supervisor. Just to get started, there are people watching online, and then we have people in person, so we're going to try to bridge these two in this hybrid format. And at the beginning of this, I'll be going through a presentation that everybody online and in person will be able to see. As soon as we're about to be done, Gabby will be distributing some maps for people, for those who are attending in person, to be able to work either themselves or collaboratively with others to draw community of interest maps, and those who are at home can use the online mapping tool to do the same thing. So first off, we have a redistricting advisory committee. This committee is broken up with appointees by supervisor district. So a total of 15 members that are on the committee, and I see already that some of them are here today. We're going to cover the redistricting basics, how the committee is going to be doing its work, the traditional redistricting principles, what is a community of interest. We'll go through a tool demonstration for Districtor, which is the online mapping tool. And then we will have an opportunity for people here to get the microphone and verbally talk about their community of interest. And then we'll also have the ability for those who are here to do the public mapping. Michelle, the online participants, they'll be able to maybe raise a hand or something if they want to give public comment. Is that set up or not? You know?
No, what I did was I just set up the computer so people know that the redistricting meetings have moved to in-person, because there were a couple of people that dialed in last week. Okay. So I just want to make sure people know, and then if they can't make it in time, then they can go to the next one.
Great. And they can also at any time submit community of interest testimony using that mapping tool. As I'll show when we get to it, the mapping tool allows you to give that testimony both by drawing an area, but also by describing your community of interest, which is really critical. So if somebody says, I don't really know exactly where it is, but I know how to describe it verbally, then they could type that in. And then we'll go through the remaining hearing schedule. So for those who are new to the process, redistricting is a process we undergo every 10 years after the decennial census. The idea is to rebalance election districts, and there's really two reasons why we do this. One is there's a constitutional guarantee that everybody has equal representation. You can't have a situation where somebody gets more members of Congress than somebody else, right? Everybody gets equal representation, so when we have a decennial census, we want to readjust boundaries so that everybody's districts are roughly the same size. To give an example of this, I often talk about a redistricting we did in another county, where there was a situation with 5 districts, but they hadn't updated their district boundaries since 1950. And so those districts used to be balanced, but in the subsequent 60 years at that time, they'd gone from being balanced districts to being districts where one district had 12,000 people and the other district had 100,000 people. So in that 12,000, 100,000 district scenario, literally the people in the 12,000 person district had 8 times the representative power. If they had a pothole and they went to their elected official, their voice would be 8 times stronger than one of the people in the 100,000 person district going to their elected official. They would have to take 7 of their friends to have kind of the equal representative power of somebody in the other district. The second reason why we rebalance these districts is a constitutional guarantee, oftentimes kind of known as one person, one vote, meaning that everybody has equal access to the ballot, everybody's has equal voting rights. That one person, one vote concept is violated when districts are really out of balance. Think about that area with the 12,000, 100,000. When we actually looked at eligible voters, it changed a little bit. It was, I think, 10,000 and 70,000 was kind of the ratio. So it wasn't an 8-to-1 ratio anymore, it was a 7-to-1 ratio, but still, one person's vote in one district was 7 times more important and more valuable than one person's vote in the other district. So rebalancing those is important. The Redistricting Advisory Committee was established by the county supervisors to really go out and help identify what are the building blocks of the redistricting process, which are the communities of interest. They're going to be conducting these average hearings, which I'm really excited to see really good participation here today in these. Identify communities of interest from the public input, and then report to the board on what the Redistricting Advisory Committee has received, and help identify, probably create some kind of a narrative description of the different communities of interest that came forward in the process. As was discussed at the last redistricting meeting, there are potentially thousands or an infinite number of potential communities of interest that could be thought of in redistricting, and we'll talk about what that means. But really the subjective part of this is having, highly qualified, competent people that are from the community sitting on this board to say, these are the communities that came forward, these are the communities that really have compelling arguments as to why they need to be a community of interest. What was the process, in California 20, 30, 40 years ago? In most counties, the process was somebody goes and looks up the address of every incumbent, and then somebody else goes and draws the line to make sure all the incumbents are okay. That literally was about 90% of the redistricting process in a lot of local government around the state and around the country. California has said that the process is different. We're going to identify communities. We're going to identify what types of people are living in a jurisdiction and how they relate to the local government, and then identify how districts can be drawn that are fairer for representation. So it's really a wonderful change, and it's great to see members of the public participating in this way, really putting that member of the public viewpoint and community viewpoint first in the process. So the timeline that we're under is, it's a timeline we couldn't have conceived of a year ago or 2 years ago, but with the late census and all the problems with COVID, this is the timeline that we're under right now. The first meeting was in the spring of this year. We started doing outreach hearings June 23rd. We're doing those throughout the county. We're going to be submitting to the county on September 23rd the advice from this outreach process. Now that's September 23rd date is actually the date that we're also expected to get the final census data for the redistricting process. It'll be all the census data plus the reallocation of prison population that's required in California. So essentially, if you're on the County Board of Supervisors in the position of having to readjust boundaries, you're going to, at the end of September, receive information on the final census data, and you're going to receive information as to what are the building blocks of the redistricting process. And from that, they're going to be able to adjust boundaries in a way that reflects the communities. So what are the traditional criteria? Some of these traditional criteria are followed around the country. Some of these traditional criteria are requirements in state law. And there are additional things that we'll be talking about as criteria, but these are kind of considered the main traditional criteria. One is that districts be equal size, not voters and not citizens, equal size based on total population. A second is that districts be contiguous, meaning they're whole parts. You're not having districts, we have seen this in other places, where literally it's like a district over here and then 10 miles of some other district, and then that first district pops up somewhere else. That's not legal in the US. even if there's not a law against it in a statute in a state, it's still not legal based on how the courts federally have interpreted redistricting. Maintaining communities of interest is one we'll talk about in more depth. Following city, county, local government lines is a traditional criteria and one that's actually in the state law as a requirement in supervisorial districting. You might hear a real technical term. We'll talk about not splitting cities, and then we'll talk about not splitting census designated places. A census designated place is like a town that's unincorporated that the census recognizes. And they actually provide us the boundaries of that town that is being recognized. So, we could look throughout the county and identify those, probably just from your own common sense. And then with the census data, we'll actually have it objectively with the specific lines. And then keeping districts compact. Now, compactness means small. Compactness means in shape, that it's not like some crazy serpentine thing, but it's more like, a circle or a square, and also that it's not doing a thing where it's trying to go out and reach faraway people when there's nearby people right there that it could put into a district. The community of interest aspect is something that has been around for a while as a concept among redistricting people, but it has really kind of been pushed to the fore as a requirement for redistricting in California this cycle, more so than ever before. Communities of interest are subjective. The testimony we're going to be receiving is subjective. I might say that my community of interest is, my neighborhood where I ride my bikes, where I take my daughter to school, the coffee shop I go to. Like, that's my community of interest, and somebody else living in the same area might say, well, my community of interest is, where I go fishing or hunting and my access to recreation and so on. So people can have their own different communities of interest. Even within certain communities, like you could have where I grew up in Glendale, you might have the Armenian community coming forward and saying, this is our Armenian community of interest. But then you might also have other Armenian members of the community coming forward and saying, my community of interest is this arts district. So they're not necessarily perfectly aligned either. They can be overlapping. People can have multiple ideas of their communities of interest. There are some communities of interest that are covered by the Voting Rights Act. In California, largely we're talking about Latinos, Asians, and African Americans. Gabby and I, Gabby's on our staff, we're getting a great education this redistricting cycle because we're doing some redistricting in other states, and so we're learning about the Voting Rights Act protected Alaskan Natives. In other states, there might be more Voting Rights Act protected Native Americans, and so different ethnic, national, language communities can be covered by the Voting Rights Act. But in California, and especially in most of California, Latinos are the most quickly emerging large Voting Rights Act protected group. Now, while we might have situations in California that some communities are required to draw Latino majority minority districts or districts that can be effective majority minority districts for the African American population or even the Asian population, while we might have situations in redistricting where a lawyer comes in and says, hey, you need to draw a district that protects Latinos here, we also are in a situation under federal law where we can't draw districts predominantly based on race unless there's a Section 2 requirement, a federal Voting Rights Act requirement. So it is kind of a weird and challenging thing. One way to think about it is we shouldn't ever call a district the Latino district or the Asian district or the Black district, because that would suggest that those lines are being drawn with that purpose. You might want to talk about a district that has the historic Latin community and has the Latinx Center, and that the students there speak primarily Spanish or they're native Spanish speakers, and the different elements of the community of interest that defines that area, but not just call it only by its national or ethnic or racial composition. One of the best Voting Rights Act attorneys in the country, who has been doing some presentations for us, likens race to the speedometer on your car. When I drove over here, I knew that I couldn't go over 65 miles an hour Or is it 70? I don't know. I might not really be thinking about it too much, but I can't go over the speed limit when I'm driving, right? But what if my driving pattern was predominantly looking at the speedometer, right? If I'm staring at the speedometer, I would not be a safe driver. When we drive, we look at pedestrians and cars and intersections and lights and cyclists and other things around, and we constantly kind of like check the speedometer, make sure we're not breaking the speed limit. That's kind of how it is with considering racial composition of districts and drawing lines. We can't have it be the only criteria, but it also is something we can't just kind of ignore. Communities of interest are varied, and it is so much fun working in local areas and learning about local communities of interest. In some cases, they are, the community of interest could be people who come to this library and access to libraries. There might be a part of the county that considers itself a library desert. A library desert would be a part of an area where there just isn't access to the same services, the same libraries, and they might be a community of interest because they are not getting a service that the county could help provide, right? There could be communities of interest of the runners that go running up Vaca Mountain, or it could be the communities of interest of cyclists that go riding around Cantaloupe Road, or it could be the community of interest of business people in a downtown area. It could be a community of interest of renters, or it could be a community of interest of students. There's all kinds of different communities of interest in the process, and we're definitely wanting to hear from as many as possible. So there are also communities of interest that we cannot talk about or consider in the redistricting process. If I decided this morning on my drive over here that I want to run for county supervisor, and I want to come to a commission meeting and say that I want the district lines that make me as a potential candidate for county supervisor best off, that is not a legitimate community of interest. Community of interest cannot be candidates or political or incumbents. It cannot be political parties. If the chairman of the Libertarian Party were to walk in and say, my community of interest is this area where all the libertarians live and we want a district to ourselves, that would not be something that could be passed on to the county supervisors as a community of interest. It's not the kind of community of interest that could be utilized in drawing lines under California law. It's also hard sometimes to identify communities of interest when somebody says, oh yeah, my community of interest, it goes from the eastern border to the western border and from the northern border to the southern border. It's the whole thing, right? And that isn't really an effective way for us to talk about communities of interest when we're interested in a supervisory redistricting in drawing spatial areas, geographic areas to define that community of interest. If somebody said my community of interest is left-handed people and they live all throughout the county, then you can't draw it as a real geographic area of the communities of interest. Once we figure out how to move all left-handed people to one town, then it could be a community of interest. The three questions that we want to kind of get answers to in community of interest testimony are these. What is kind of the name of the community of interest? What is its characteristic? What is its bond? I said earlier, the running club, Vaca Valley Running Club. That could be a community of interest as a name. They could talk about who they are and what their interests are and what they do and how that defines them. What is the community's geographic nature? For the running club, it might be where they go running. For the downtown business area, it might be the streets that they have their business in. So what is that defined geographic area? Just drawing a circle around it is fine. It doesn't have to be super specific. And then third, what is the relationship from that community to the agency that's being redistricted? One of the most interesting ways I've heard communities of interest being defined by one of the groups was a community of interest is a group that is harmed by their government. And I thought to myself, that sounds like a little negative, but still it made a point. A community of interest is a group that is seeking something from their government, whether it's sidewalks or streetlights or fixed potholes or access to libraries or whatever it is that they're trying to seek. And when they're harmed by their government because because they're divided up into 3 districts or something like that, then trying to make that community more whole in a redistricting and to bring that community together empowers them and it puts them better off. So that connection back to local government. So if somebody were to say, my community of interest is these people that live in this one neighborhood, and we all have this shared interest because we, are whatever our characteristics, but they don't really say how that connects back to the county government, then maybe that's something we want to hear. Maybe that's something we can say, what is the connection between that community of interest and the county government? Oftentimes, people answer these three questions without even knowing it. We listen to a lot of community of interest testimony, and somebody will say, my community of interest is, I'll use a cycling thing again, my community of interest is cyclists, and we ride up around Canela Road and down Pleasant Valley Road and all this area, and we are really concerned about the potholes, and the roads have been really bad, and there's been bad traffic, and we don't feel like the county supervisors are addressing that, and what did I just do? In that short thing, I checked all three of those boxes. I didn't know that I was checking all three of those boxes, but I did because I was just talking about my community of interest. And so as people who are listening to this online, or people who are coming to these meetings, as they think about how to testify about their community of interest, think about checking those boxes. And as advisory committee members, when you're listening to community of interest testimony, listen for that, like develop that ear, and then if somebody gives great testimony but they don't check one of those boxes, like they say what they are but they don't say like the name of their community of interest, then you could just ask them or something. We got some examples of communities of interest. This is a little bit of a game, it's fun, and we'll get some participation here. So let's imagine there's a group of renters downtown who testify to the redistricting commission for a city or a county or their local school board. Would this be considered a community of interest? Yay or nay? I got thumbs up. Absolutely. It is a community of interest. You could say, what is your name? We're renters. What is the footprint? We're here. And what is the connection to local government? Well, there's a number. Rent control could be one. Access to services, there's just any number of issues that could be renter issues. Historically recognized town or area, or even the history of an area, going back 200 years. It's within the boundaries of a county. Is that a community of interest? Yeah, it's a little bit weirder, but it is. So it could be, well, think about Flint, Michigan, right? So Flint, Michigan is a town that's been losing a lot of population over time, but is still like incredibly important as a community of interest in Michigan. We're doing redistricting in Butte County, and the town of Paradise is in one supervisorial district. It used to have 26,000 people. We were talking yesterday, I was emailing with the redistricting consultant that's doing Plumas County. They just told a whole town burned down. Like, is that a community of interest? Is that something that should be considered? Absolutely. In another perspective, we're doing redistricting in Long Beach and San Jose, and both of those areas have had historic redlining. And so the redlining laws are gone. Those policies are no longer around. But there was a time when actually the government instituted policies that would make it harder for people to buy and sell homes if they were people of color around in California and in a lot of these cities. That continues to have a scarring effect on communities. And even though the people who are living there now have never personally been affected by the redlining laws, their communities have, and that becomes a community of interest in redistricting, historic issues regarding those communities. This is actually a Solano County specific example. Almond walnut farmers in the unincorporated area ensuring they have enough water for their orchards. Now, would this is, I don't even know what the answer is going to be when I go to the next slide. For a water district, would this be a community of interest, do you think? Yeah. County, maybe. We'll see. See what Gabby says. Gabby says yes. So their geographic location, they have shared interests, obviously. For a county supervisory districting, it might have to do with roads, access. It might have to do with, there might be water implications. I don't know if the county has any involvement with the water there. But they do, okay. But I know with the water district redistricting, we literally got maps of where the almond farmers were and where the walnut farmers were, and that became an issue in the local redistricting. A statewide group for fans of the Giants testifies to the redistricting commission. No, not a community of interest. So it's a no. Gabby says no. Now, yeah.
But if you put the Oakland A's, it would be.
Yeah, maybe. Absolutely. So, what would actually make it a community of interest is, what if the Giants or the A's were relocating to the county, and the county was putting money into services, and people in the community were worried about traffic and noise, and they said, oh yeah, and by the way, we need a permit. Like I live in Sacramento, and so when the River Cats have their games, they do fireworks, right? And so they're going to need the county to authorize fireworks 3 nights a week or whatever. Then that does become a community of interest. They're worried about noise, they're worried about traffic, they're worried about pollution, they're worried about, you know, the unseemly A's fans, you know, wandering their streets. So then it could be a community of interest. But right now, probably not. Input can be provided in a number of ways. Verbally at these meetings is a critical way, or even online in the online meetings. We have a on the Solano County Redistricting website, there's a community of interest form that you can fill out to provide testimony. We have here map submissions where you can draw your community of interest. And then when the data is released, then we could have the public, even to the county supervisors directly, drawing draft full maps with all the supervisor districts. The online mapping tool is available, and the link is here, but I will go to the actual program real quick and just give a little quick demonstration of how this works. So, Districtor is the program we're using. Districtor program was created by researchers at Tufts University, some real geography and math geeks who also were interested in public engagement and how community members around the country could kind of tell their story about their community. It's become one of the most commonly used now platforms for doing community-based line drawing, especially in California, where I think we probably will see this being used, and by the time it's sold, probably 100 jurisdictions will use this. What we have set up right now is the mapping tool with the ability to see every area of Solano County. And then when you're in Solano County, you can go ahead, and there are a couple different tools you can use. One is you can draw your community of interest and name it and describe it. So going back to my earlier thing, I say my community of interest is up here where all the cycling is, like just on that side of the 505, and up here, and that's my community of interest. So I've now drawn an area of a community of interest that me and my friends like to go out and go riding in, and where we have concerns about certain issues. So I can call this, let's see, I'll call this cycling, and I can put a description of why that's an important area for me. Then to drill down even further, I could go ahead and create a important place. So I've clicked that, and now I can come over here and I can pick some place like that frontage road along the 505. This frontage road has an issue where it kind of like rises up and then kind of drops down, and sometimes the cars can't see you when they're coming, you know, and so maybe we as a cycling club have been advocating for like signage that says give 3 feet or whatever the issues that we're going to the county for. I just made that up. It does dip in reality, but I made up the sign part. So we now have this new point as a point, and I'm going to call this, I'll call this, sorry. I don't know now how to get rid of that. Okay, I'm going to call this new point 3 feet. So that's where me and my community, I can describe that, want to have our 3-foot rule sign. And so now I've drawn an area, I've drawn a point, and I could then go ahead and save this. And when I hit save, it'll do a couple things. One is it gives me this link. Now I have this link that I can copy to my clipboard. And when I copy that to my clipboard, I can email it to my friends in the cycling club and say, hey, everybody, you guys do this. Or I can send it into the county as a public submission with in an email. I can also, though, right here, click the share now thing, and I could even give it a name, cyclists, and share to the gallery. When I share to the gallery, it will allow that to be seen by others. I'm going to go ahead and not share it just so keep that simpler. But when people share it with others, they can go ahead and see those other plans that people have put together. So one last thing that's interesting about this tool is that I said before that communities of interest aren't necessarily monolithic. There might be multiple communities of interest. And this tool allows you to actually create multiple and overlapping communities of interest. So if I had my community of interest that I said was, my cycling community of interest over here like I had, and then I also have my community of interest and I want to create a new one. I also happen to live in Dixon, and so I've got this Dixon community of interest. I'm going to make this paintbrush a little bit smaller. I can zoom in. I can move around. Now I want to also put in my community of interest. And my community of interest is the Dixon neighborhood on this side of Porter Road. I don't know if people know, but is the high school on this side? No, the high school's on the high school. So I've got this community of interest that I have as my second community of interest. That's one of them. And then I have another one, and my other community of interest actually crosses over this community of interest, and it crosses over this community of interest. So I've got a community of interest that's kind of a third one that I could identify that's larger and crosses over them. So the neat thing about this tool is it does allow you to create communities of interest that overlap other communities of interest and name them. So I've got my community of interest where I live, I got my community of interest where I go riding, I've got my community of interest of where I work and how I get to work, all kinds of things. These are stories that you're telling. And you're telling them in a geographic way, which is really powerful for those who are trying to put together what are the communities of interest and where are they and how do we report that to the county. Those who are in person, we will be passing these out. Do you want to pass these out now, just since we have these laminated maps and we dry erase markers so that you can just draw your community of interest on it. If you make a mistake, you can just kind of rub it out and fix it or whatever. When you do have these done, we'll take a picture of them with our cell phones, and we'll have those available on the website as pictures. And then if it's a community of interest that's really clear and we can draw it in the mapping software, we'll try to do that as well, so that can be part of the final report. That's what the map looks like. There's upcoming hearings. We're going to be continuing to have these outreach hearings. We're going to be having these outreach hearings in person and having information online right now going through August 28th. And then for more information, this is the website that you can go to. I just Google Solano County Redistricting, it comes right up. It's easy to find. And with that, I think we're going to do two things. We're going to have an opportunity for people to draw their maps. But before we do that, we'll have an opportunity for members of the public to give community of interest testimony. This doesn't mean like a back and forth kind of debate thing. This just means coming up and talking about your community in those 3 points if we can. And so, Michelle, you have the roaming microphone. Do you want to handle that part, or do you want me to? Okay. So, Michelle, if somebody wants to raise their hand or come up, we'll give you the microphone so that you can give your community of interest testimony.
Or if you just have questions, we're happy to take those.
Hi, everyone. My name's Chris Angle. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for coming out. I'm one of the representatives from District 2 on the commission. We really need your input to identify the various communities of interest, because the report that we give the Board of Supervisors is really basically going to consist in aggregate of everything that you tell us. So thanks for taking the time on a Saturday morning to come out and give us your thoughts. My particular community of interest is my neighborhood. It's located Cordelia Road, Thomason Lane, south of I-80. It's kind of in a historical agricultural area. The people in this neighborhood have lived there some of them have lived there multiple generations. I kind of used to joke and say, unless you've lived in the neighborhood 20 years, you're not really accepted as one of the people there. It's kind of something that, it's something where everybody could know everybody, but people kind of like to keep to themselves. Our primary concern, certain agricultural rules are some concern because there's still a little bit of agriculture that's being done out there. But also, we've got issues with flooding. We've historically had issues with flooding. Suisun Creek that runs through the center of Suisun Valley, runs down to the marsh, runs through there. I personally have had my house flooded in 2017. We came close with another flood in 2019. Wasn't quite as bad. And we also have fire issues because we have Nelson's Hill burned in last July, and so we came close. We didn't lose any houses, but we came pretty close. So that's really one of the concerns and how I would tie my community of interest in with county government. So thanks very much again for coming out, and I'll turn the mic over back to Jeff.
Does anyone have any questions?
I don't think I need a mic.
We're recording.
Oh, sorry. My question has to do with all the fires. Where are the firefighters, fire stations jurisdictions? Because I live at the bottom of Nelson Hill, and the fire was up to my backyard. And the Cordelia Firehouse is close to my house, but they're not required to be there. They're not the first responders to my house. So when you redistrict, what happens to all the fire stations, and where will their jurisdictions be?
So, believe it or not, the fire district will also have to have their own redistricting. So the fire districts, if they're at large elections, then they wouldn't have districts, but if they do have local elections in districts, then they would. We're doing fire districts redistricting in Novato and Marin. I'm not familiar with the Solano one, but I would expect that there is a local agency that determines that, and that you would be able to have the same kind of input in that agency's redistricting process as well.
If I may?
Yeah.
Okay. So
And we have a county supervisor that can answer this question for
just a second.
There are several fire districts. So we have the Suisun, we have Cordelia, Montezuma, and some others that aren't coming to me. Our goal is to try to consolidate so that we have one fire district that deals with the unincorporated area. So I'm just FYI to just let you know, because they don't generate enough income. So like everything else is always money, but just to kind of tie in animal with what you're talking about.
Thanks.
I know we're talking about redistricting, but you had spoke about you can't have like these weird lines. But if you look at Fairfield, the green on the map, it almost looks exactly like what you were saying can't be done. They've chosen to go just right along the railroad and get this huge area out there.
Yeah.
I live in Old Town Cordelia, and we're getting overrun by Fairfield, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah. So what you're saying there is really interesting. First off, every once in a while you'll see like a TV report on gerrymandering, and they'll show these districts with these crazy lines. Yep. And then sometimes I'm looking at it because I've done a lot of redistricting, and I'm like, oh, they're showing the city boundaries of San Diego. Like San Diego, believe it or not, San Diego is like the blob that's San Diego at the top. And then there's literally like a water right-of-way or something like that that goes down, and then the bottom part of San Diego that goes to the Mexican border. And so there are weird shapes in local government, and sometimes if you draw districts to follow the city boundaries, which is one of the requirements, you also end up with some weird shapes. And those annexations, the areas where a city grows out and annexes, you sometimes see like these kind of Swiss cheese looking things that end up happening. Now that is a reality of the architecture of our underlying cities, so you might end up seeing districts that aren't all circles and squares because they're following city boundaries. The other point that you made is that your Old Town Cordelia, was that right, is somewhat overrun by the Fairfield. That is a way of expressing that our community of interest in Cordelia, maybe we want to have some other way to have, you know, a better voice with our county supervisors and a better voice in our city government, because right now we're kind of subjected to the voters in Fairfield for everything. So making that community of interest argument is exactly what we're trying to do. Brian,
and I want to take with you in a minute. We're going to exchange information.
okay, I just wanted Michelle.
So I just wanted to add, so the cities are also going to be doing their own redistricting. So if you actually live in city limits, you want to be involved in the city. So if you live in the city of Fairfield's city limits, you probably want to go to their website. They have a redistricting project that they have to do as well.
But as not a citizen of Fairfield City, do I have a right to say, no, we don't want you coming out here in our rural area and trying to take over?
I'm sure you do.
It's called LAFCO, and there's no discussion right now of annexing Old Cordelia.
Right,
But just FYI, the reason that you see what you see is because of following the railroad, like you indicated, called cherry picking, which
Yes.
they cannot do anymore. But that was that where you were going to go, Chris?
Yeah, I was going to give a little historical context on that. They did that back in the 60s or early 70s. They came right down the railroad tracks. So it would be totally illegal to do today. And in fact, it kind of impacts me personally because I have the way they came up and took part of my family's property on one side of Thomas and Lane. I live on the other side, and this has actually impacted me when I've had to call law enforcement out. If it's on one side of the road, I have to call the county sheriff. If it's on the other side of the road, because I did call the county sheriff, they said, no, that's on the other side of the road. You need to call Fairfield PD. So I had to get on the phone with Fairfield PD to get them out there. So again, you're right. The only thing that connects this part of what's Fairfield, and we'll call it Fairfield proper, is that railroad tracks. And again, it's completely illegal. It would never be allowed today. But it's, historical relevant.
There's lots of things that used to be legal in our time. Didn't make sense, so let's fix it.
Just adding to that, the way the districts currently are, where I live, which is actually north of CA 12, south of Texas Street, is part of the same county district that Cordelia Green Valley is in, which I guess doesn't really make sense because it's a different character, down here versus where I live. That's the thing.
So I had observed the Green Valley area, whereby all of Green Valley, with the exception of East Ridge Estates, East Ridge, the gated community, is separate. So that's curious to me.
Do you have a map currently that shows the current district lines?
We actually have zoom-ins of some of the areas that shows the boundaries of the current district lines. We don't have the current district lines overlaid on this map in part because we don't want to make people think that all we're trying to do is, redo the same current district lines. It's really up to building those community of interest blocks more than the existing lines, but you can definitely look at that. So, without any other verbal testimony, I think what we can do is let people, there's one more hand in the back, Michelle. As soon as we're done with the testimony, we'll allow people to go and draw those maps. And then when you're done, let's make sure you bring them up here so that we can have a picture taken. Debbie, do you want to grab the mic and take it over there for us? Michelle can help out there. Thank you.
Good morning. A lot of the points made were on my note list, so that's pretty awesome. But I wanted two things. Point of clarification. Did you say cities, that you try to group cities together? Because I was really curious why Sassoon was split into two. So is that something we would do, kind of circle the whole city of Sassoon? Also, if there's another area that we know need to kind of be put together as communities of concerns, like Vacaville, like portions of Vacaville, can we notate that on this map, or is this only
Yeah, absolutely.
for District 2? Okay, awesome.
So the cities and those boundaries are there just for reference, but like Sassoon, you can see it has what is called an island, we call that, where there's an unincorporated part that's kind of in between that area and Fairfield. There's also a non-contiguous part of Sassoon City to the east. And somebody could say, well, this whole area, including the unincorporated area, is part of like how I perceive the larger Sassoon City community of interest. So that's definitely right. And with Vacaville, same thing. You don't have to draw lines that just follow the city boundaries. You could draw a line that says this side of Vacaville is different than the other side of Vacaville. Like you could say that on one side of the 80, it's different than on the southern side of the 80.
Got it. And then my final question is, this map is not big enough to really get into details. So do we just kind of make a general circle, but just pay more attention in the description area to describe?
Exactly. Like,
okay, got
yeah,
it.
so you could put a thing where you say, well, this is where I'm drawing my community of interest, but then add like it's actually the intersection of these two highways or something. And then the online mapping tool, you definitely can get in to like looking down at the street level, and actually picking like really close into things. You could take the cemetery and put in the 3 different communities of interest if you wanted to. You could get that detailed.
So I wanted to add also, Paul, if you look at the supervisorial districts that exist now and the reason why some of the cities are split, to divide the county into 5 equal parts, that's the point of redistricting, is so that each supervisor represents a equal amount of people. So if you look at Vacaville, Vallejo, for instance, their population is much higher than 1/5 of the county. So at some point you do have to slice it so that it becomes equal. So I think when they did this 10 years ago, which I wasn't here at the time, I think that they try to slice and dice it in that manner. Any more questions?
Well, I want to just thank you very much for coming out. Trying to get information from people on these communities of interest has been really great, but it's also sometimes hard when we don't have new district lines to be looking at. We're just looking at our communities of interest. So I hope that we continue to see participation and engagement like this, and thanks for having us out here.
Thanks, Paul.
No, we're in now.